Thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure to be with us, Civic Society and friends and guests who come along especially to hear us, which is a real pleasure. I'll start by saying we're being recorded, so I need plenty of applause and cheering. It's going down well. I tend to do this regularly, but as you tell you, I do overdo it. I go into too much detail, so apologies. I hope you stay with me for this full hour. But I'm going to bombard you with a lot of information, a lot of facts and figures, Latin phrases, and Roman inscriptions, but it's all evidence that proves what we know about the Antonine War. Very easy phrase to remember: who, what, where, when, how, why. That's exactly the way I'm tackling this new topic for me. I've got a grounding in Roman history and archaeology, studying at Korean way back, a thoroughly enjoyable course. But that enthusiasm I hope will rub off on you. I'll try and make it interesting. There's some surprising things that come up and raise their head during my research. And hopefully I'll get a glimpse of it myself when Izzy and I make a trip up north later this year and make a beeline for some of the main attractions on the wall itself. Pleased to hear Felicity has actually lived on the wall, so she'll be able to pick on, if I get this wrong, about Caradon, for example, which is a fort on the eastern edge. Now, before any further ado, let's crack on. Lots to talk about, probably getting in the way of it. I'm going to be standing here most of the time. This is in the Museum of Scotland, as it says there, the National Gallery, and it shows the main protagonists that have a big influence, people that have a big influence on the Roman War, particularly the Antonine War, the most furtherly northern frontier, or is it? It's not actually, as we'll find out later. But for instance, you can see the Septimius Severus, there's Tacitus and Agricola, and of course the Emperors Hadrian and Antonius Pius all play a key role in what you're about to hear. We've got a 39-mile wall, some say 37. This is the problem with anything when you look at history and archaeology. The exaggeration of the truth. Some say 37 miles, some say 39 miles, and then you've got a Roman mile being different to the mile that we know today. But anyway, it's roughly between 37 and 39 miles. We're going to compare and contrast the Hadrian's Wall, of course, with the more famous cousin. But basically, in a nutshell, Hadrian's Wall was twice as long, with half as many forts, whereas the Antonine Wall was half the size, with twice as many forts. So many forts, in fact, there's one every 2 miles, with a fort between. So imagine signalling, communication would have been easy, because you'd be able to see the fire or the flag, or even the soldier waving at you. How do we know all this? Obviously, in the modern era, particularly 20th, 21st century, we can draw on our history from the media, from camera and film. Didn't have that in those days, of course. And pre-Roman, we didn't even have any written history. But we got a lot to draw on from the iconography, the imagery, what we know that already exists. Most famously, of course, is Pompeii, which gives us a whole host of information that tells us all about the Roman way of life, and the baths and the pastimes, and we know all about the military from exploits across the empire. Now, Ptolemy was the very first official geographer, if you like, and it's, as it says behind me, in the latter part of the 2nd century, and he gets a lot of this information, Greek geographer rather, from Agricola. Whose Agricola actually circumnavigated pretty well most of Scotland, or as we know, it wasn't called Scotland in those days, full of various tribes, which you can't read, but they're all on this. So this is the crude map that Ptolemy did of the British Isles, and it's known that the Roman fleet, classic Britannicus, got as far as the Orkneys. And we know that there's a major Roman base just south of Aberdeen, and a legionary base at Inch Tuttle,
on the tail, near the tail rather, and that's the most northerly legionary base in the whole of the Roman Empire. And of course, any legionary base would have 5,000 troops at least, as at nearby Caerleon. And Usk, of course, where I stood now, was the headquarter building for the legion during the time of Nero. So there we are, for those who are totally unsure what we're talking about. There's Caerleon, and all the way up north to Hadrian's Wall, and the isthmus there between the Clyde and the Forth, the most narrow point in British Isles. And there we see a series of forts and fortlets along the most northern frontier. But as we'll find out later, there's another frontier even further north on the Antonine, and that's the Gas Bridge, which protects the Roman harbours and navy fleet and settlements from the predominantly Caledonian tribes in the Highlands. Just to whet your appetite, we'll start off by looking at several sites that are got some really interesting finds, if you like. Cramond, not on the wall, but just off it, a major harbour on the southern banks of the Forth. As it says there, supply base, access from the sea. And this is something we should never forget, how important the Navy was in those days for getting about, and rivers as well, of course, not just by road. Cramond itself, what you can see today is the fabrica or workshop, which they recently found at Caerleon, and for repairs and metalwork and so on, and what they call the Via Principalis, which is the main road through the fort. A milestone was found in Ingliston, which is just as the map shows, just south of Cramond, Ingliston, and that was the main route of communication south to the Roman province. So what we're looking at today is a real military area. We don't get any villas, we don't get any Romanisation here, we don't get the leisure and pleasure. It's a hard war zone. On that stone there was an inscription, and it mentions Antoninus Pius, and so we've got all these evidence everywhere we look that this war really was under the orders of Antoninus Pius. Hadrian or Civic, it was under the orders of Hadrian. But not always the case. It was called the Severan War for many years, because they thought it was Septimius Severus, emperor, who had built Hadrian's Wall. In fact, he repaired it 100 years later. Interesting find, Eagle Rock. It's very weathered, but that's on the coast from Cramond supply base, and this was for the Romans to arrive and depart and pay homage to the eagle and the rock. And the eagle was a symbol of strength, and the army would worship, and of course it became the standard of the legions as well, highly venerated. Even in 1794 it was badly worn, as you can see there. And some even thought it was the deity of Mercury. On the subject of the eagle, we'll be looking at distance maps later and what they are, but there's an eagle depicted here with the goddess, or Victory, or Britannia, and she's presenting a wreath to the eagle and held by a standard bearer. So it's all symbolism. You can see the barbarians to the left and the right bound up as a symbol of subservience and defeat. More of that later. Here we are in 1900, they're finding a torso. Unfortunately, a lot of statues, you only have the base or the pedestal, or the heads are long missing. But just to digress a little bit,
A lot of statuary or distant slabs, for example, were deliberately buried upside down at the time. Why? Maybe they wanted generations later to see what had been left behind. I mean, for us to talk about it today. This was found in Cramont, put in the river, dredging, by accident, and they pulled up this 1.5 metre long lioness devouring a bearded man. And there it is in the museum. And at a place called Coolbridge, just south of Hadrian's Wall actually, which was a major legionary base and supply base, if you like, for the war effort, there is a tomb there with lions. Similar thing. And maybe, just maybe, this artistic drawing here depicts a temple outside the fort here at Cramond, and maybe that's where the lion was originally on display, the military tomb. The wall itself, as we mentioned earlier, there was a phase one where there was just half a dozen forts, and then they decided to go further and build another 19 in total. So, and they're still being found to this day. There's still been new discoveries, thanks to crop marks, dry summers, which we'll look at in a second. But this is a disadvantage of the outside wall of the Hadrian's Wall. A lot of Hadrian's Wall is there to be seen still. It wasn't totally built of stone. A third of the Hadrian's Wall was built of turf as well. But obviously turf not going to last for centuries. So largely the main remnants you'll see today on the ground are the ditches, because the actual wall has been worn away. And any wood, the wooden palisade at the top, would decay. As a general rule, though, Romans tended to occupy a place, building wood first, then stone. Us, here we are in us, legionary base, but made of wood, apart from the baths, which had to be stone for obvious reasons, and the furnaces for heating the water for the baths. But predominantly woods. We've got very little left to see for that reason, whereas Caerleon, which was also originally built with wood, was then built with stone, hence you've got a lot to see today. And there we are, just saying how Hadrian's Wall built in stone, and then they are hard at work, and road building as well. Not just forts and fortlets, but also extensions and watchtowers, and these have been lit for communication, warn of danger, etc. And here we are about our crop marks, how you dig a ditch, and then vegetation grows over. So from above, the darker means it's deeper, and the lighter, shallower. So you've got a rough idea that there's some, you can see the marks of what would have been maybe a fortlet or a ditch from aerial photography, or nowadays with drones. Wales, for example, has found Roman settlements a lot further afield than they ever realised, throughout Snowdonia and the north west, for example, in Pembrokeshire. Here's Caerleon on the eastern area of Antonine Wall, and there we are with the impression of what it would look like with the fort there. So there's that. Another interesting place to look at first is Rough Castle. One of the Rough Castles roughly in the middle, central area of the Antonine Wall. And it's like a double fort, if you like. It's not really, because one half is an annex, where your bars would have been, your granaries, and then the other half is where your barracks and the usual buildings you'd expect to see in a fort would be located. And in front, to the north of your fort, would be your ditch and your wall. So there's an impression of what I'm talking about, your annex and your main principal buildings that Caerleon would have, us would have had, with the granaries behind me here, and the sessions house,
and headquarter building where we are, the Praetorium, or the officers' house, even the hospital. But also, not forgetting, they've got to eat and drink, so a lot of they rely on supplies, and hence we had South Shields as a major supply base with, I think, up 9 or 10 granaries. Us had 4, and that is to supply war effort, which is what they learned the lessons from Caesar in Gaul, where the Gauls deliberately burnt their cornfields to try and starve out the Romans. So you need your food. So these are field systems, ancient field systems that would have been used by the Romans outside Rough Castle for their porridge, or whatever it is, with bread and so on. And there is a granary, excavated 1903 at Rough Castle. There's some, flick through some pictures of it. There's an impressive ditch and the rampart. And here's the linear, which are defensive pits designed to ward off the enemy. So here's our basic plan of the fort and annex, and the linear in front. More pictures of the linear here. Designed in such a way that you've got to keep, if you're the enemy, you have to keep moving out of the way, and it'll be shielded, covered in branches and leaves, and there'll be stakes in the base, or to slow you down at least if it didn't kill you. And here, the good old Trajan's column in Rome depicts all these things. As you know, there's all this storyline of Trajan's activities against the Dacians in the Eastern Empire. But there's similar things there that will tell you would have happened, because Trajan appeared at a time between Agricola and Antoninus Pius. So that is stakes there in the ground on what would be the crude linear. More of Trajan's column later. Bar Hill. So we've looked at Cramond, we've looked at Rough Castle. Now let's look at Bar Hill, which is one of the 7 primary, so I'm just saying it's one of the earliest that was built. Again, impressive rampart and ditch. High up, one of the highest points on the wall. As a profile, basically the wall meets at the highest point on the central section and then drops away. And you're looking from the fort northwest over the Campsie Hills, and it basically follows a modern route, or modernish route of the Solway Firth Canal, Clyde Canal, sorry, Clyde Forth Canal, which is there. You see the watercourse of the canal there? Yeah. Bar Hill's interesting in terms of finds. Again, there's your typical features that you'd expect to see in any fort, with your headquarter building, which we'll look at in closer detail now. So there you can see your barrack blocks and workshops and your baths complex and headquarter building and so on, in elaborate ditches. Whoops, too fast. Aerial picture of the baths and headquarter building, and a little circular feature there, which was a well. So it is an artistic impression of the headquarter building, which is where it all happened. It's where your legionary centurion would address his troops, men and women, children, and some women, not many of course, they're not on a military footing. But here you'd have probably the most interesting of all, the shrine, where the Aedies would be kept, the standards of the legion, and the strong room would be in the basement for the soldiers' pay and valuables or booty that we might have captured from the enemy. And there we are, another picture. And here's the well. I mention the well a lot because you name it, they found it.
in that well. We found pediments, porticos, inscribed stones, pottery, coins, arrowheads. And this inscription, again, the name Pius comes up. And the cohort by Tijans, Belgium, who were the auxiliaries. So we've got that written evidence. There's thousands of inscriptions in Britain, and they're still finding some, and they tell us so much. They allow us to date a place and assign a certain person, a certain legion or auxiliary unit to that place. Footwear, not just for adult male, but also for women and children, which is curious. But not just a couple of shoes, apparently nearly 100. Some slingshot and blister balls. Abergavenny found a similar thing at Abergavenny Fort when digressing by the Abergavenny car park at the top there, right alongside the castle on the slope. They found slingshot, arrowheads, wheels, obviously for transport, vital, for supplies, pulled by mule and oxen as well as horse. So moving from there, I hope that's whetted your appetite, some of the finds, and then probably two of the sites you'd make a beeline for if you did go to Antonine would be Bar Hill and Rough Castle, and Carrigan, of course. I think I'm doing all that scheduling wise, but we move on now to how it all began. So putting it into context, before Antonine War began, why? Well, we're going to look at some of the key players now. Agricola is one of those. We know a heck of a lot about Agricola, thanks to his son-in-law Tacitus, ancient writer who wrote all about his uncle in very glowing, favourable terms. Some say propaganda, because it's saying it from a Roman point of view, not a barbarian. But nevertheless, he seems to offer both sides of the argument. What is frustrating with a lot of these things that Tacitus tells us is we never know exactly where a battle or a skirmish took place. We have to guess. Close to home in Wales, we know Crapticus' last stand was by a major river with a major slope and a hill. But we don't know where that major river was. Was it the Wye? Was it the Severn? Was it near Hay-on-Wye? Or was it Little Doward near Ross? Crapticus' last stand. We don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out. So Agricola comes along and he finishes off Wales. He tidies up Wales basically at the end of the AD 70s, and then he makes his way north with his legions from Chester through York to the Forth Clyde, beyond Hadrian's Wall, which didn't exist then, and to the Tay Estuary. These are the various campaigns starting from the original invasion of Britain in AD 43 under Claudius, right through to Agricola. So Agricola's in these brown arrows here, working his way up from North Wales, as I said, from Chester, York, and right up as far as Strathclyde and beyond Aberdeen. And you can see how the Navy had gone around the Orkneys. So we're talking AD 70, AD 80, and AD 80s, up to AD 84. So that was the key year when a significant battle took place. Again, with Ptolemy's map, we know about all these tribes that existed. It's easier just to say Caledonians, for the sake of argument. But there's similar things going on here to Wales. The Silures, the tribe of this area, were a tough nut to crack, just as the Caledonians were in Scotland. Why? Not just because it's in the genes or their bravery, their cunning, battle hardness, but also the environment they're from. Very hilly, mountainous, the Black Mountains and the Beacons. champions, guerrilla tactics, hit and run, hide and seek. It's very difficult for the Romans to win the conquest when it's not on open ground. Open ground, you're invincible. But as soon as you get mountains involved, and hills and valleys and woodlands, it gets difficult. So this is a map. Just don't need to look at this too closely, just to highlight there's no wars at this stage. There are no frontier wars. But in an area north of what would become Antonine Wall, Ardagh is a quite an interesting, huge fort, made of wood, but these are the finest ditches in the whole of the empire. Quintuple ditches. But is it? Basically, because it's in two eras, Agricola's era and Antonine's, albeit Antonine we're talking 50, 60 years later, it's two. Antonine's fort is smaller, hence you've got this ringwork here where the secondary fort was built for reuse. But Ardagh was a key force in his movement north because it formed the start of the gas bridge, and the gas bridge was a long line of watchtowers along a Roman road, and it basically separated the highlands from the Tay and the Forth, if you like. So they were protected. It was like a buffer zone, and that to me was the first most northerly frontier, even further north than the Antonine Wall, which is down here. Germany had a similar thing on the Danube and the Rhine, sort of and this is a recreation they've done in Germany of what they would look like. And there's a few pictures there. We've got an artist impression of the gas bridge, lookout towers, and foundations today. And I put that little altar stone in there because it actually says the Britons, and that this is actually an altar from Germany, but it's just showing there's a fluid movement of troops between Britain and Germania particularly, because conflict was hot and cold. There was peace, then there was war, peace, then there was war, like any conflict, and troops were constantly being moved from one area to the other. And we got evidence for that in a second, to show how troops were brought from Germany and vice versa. Here's again our friend Trajan's column depicting the watchtowers. But Agricola was still with Agricola. He's governor of Britain, and he moves even further north to Inchtuckle, where one of the most interesting finds was thousands of nails, which they had used for building their wooden fort, but buried on the banks of the Tay there. But this was a legionary fortress, and as I say, there aren't many. We've got Cleon, which is very proud for us in Gwent, because it's one of the permanent legionary bases eventually, because it superseded Gloucester, and before that Exeter, Lincoln, Colchester, but basically we just had Chester, Cleon and York for the rest of the 400 years the Romans were here. But further north, we temporarily had another legionary base as far north as Inchtuckle, which is way up beyond Antonine. Why? To launch his final conquest against the Caledonians at a battle called Mons Grappius, AD 84. And using poetic license now, a few images to convey the story that Tacitus tells us in detail about that battle, where the Romans make their way to meet the enemy, cavalry prepare to attack below the summit of Benach. But, as I said earlier, we don't know exactly where this battle was, but this is where most people think, most archaeologists or historians think it is. Then the Romans unleash the catapults, ballistas, stem the advance of the chariots. Then the infantry advance. But not the legions. The legions stay back in reserve. So he holds back the 9th Legion, the 20th Legion, uses his auxiliaries. And forgive me if you don't know, but auxiliary is just basically a non-Roman who fights for the Romans. Usually people being conquested, like Welsh, Silurian, maybe, or Belgium, or Germanian, or even Assyrian, Algerian, from all over the empire. In this case, Lower Germany and Belgium. Then they engaged in hand-to-hand combat, Tacitus tells us, and Callicus, who was the leader, makes his big attack. And he appears to be winning. Go around the outside, the Romans surround them, get from behind. But then Agricola deploys his cavalry, and it proves decisive. Tacitus tells us that 10,000 died from the enemy side, and just 360 Romans, without needing the legions to help. So a massive victory, or was it? Because we move to the next section now to talk about where we're going to see the repercussions of that battle. So when people say, oh, the Romans never conquered Scotland, well they did actually, amongst Scrappers. Game over. But it wasn't, because 2/3 at least escaped and ran away. Albeit their tails between their legs. But they'd fight another day, or the next generation. So we've got famous movies, stories. Rosemary Sutcliffe is her name, who wrote all about the Lost Legion, basing her story on a visit to Reading Museum where she saw an eagle, and it made her think that it's the lost eagle of the 9th Legion, but it wasn't actually an eagle from a quiver or a pendant. It was just a cockerel from a Roman villa. But that's me being facetious. What have we got here? So, the 9th Hispania, at one time they were led by Caesar himself. Agricola took them to take on the Caledonians on Scrapius. They're involved in the Battle of Boudica. There's a pottery inscribed piece of pottery with the 9th symbol on it from Killeen. So we know they served around here. So this great legion were wiped out, and nobody knows where or what happened to them, because they're removed from the record. But it's known that the Roman hierarchy, from the emperor downwards, if a legion was defeated, it was shame. It was a shame on them, and they'd wipe them off the record, either out of shame, or because they literally were wiped out. And that name no longer continued. That was the end of that legion. So here we are, the Aquila was lost, which is sacrilege. You cannot lose your eagle, you cannot lose your legion's emblem. You must. And that was true in military history until recently, where people kept banners and flags close to the heart. Parallels with, albeit some years before, AD 9, the great emperor, perhaps the greatest of all, Augustus Octavian, who succeeded Caesar, of course, and defeated Mark Antony. He had success. Empire expansion. But with the experience of Teutoburg Forest, the Romans started to question whether it's wise to keep on expanding. The time was now to consolidate what you've got and start to think about frontiers and wars. Here they are ambushed, but we mentioned auxiliaries made up of defeated peoples who joined the Romans and would ultimately become Roman citizens themselves after so many years' service in the army. One, Arminius, served under Varus himself, but he He knew the movement of the Romans, and they were deliberately ambushed because of Arminius, who's a hero in Germany to this day. There's a statue to him. There's a bit of artistic license, but there's a statue that can be seen at Teutoburg Forest. 3 legions, not just one, like the 9th, but 3 legions wiped out off the record. And a year after Augustus died, so sadly Augustus didn't live to 100, I think he was 99 when he died, but if he'd lived to 100, he'd have finally seen Germanicus get revenge in AD 14, 5 years later. Incidentally, Germanicus and Agricola were both recalled at the height of their powers. Agricola was recalled after Gracchus back to Rome, and then he had a life in the Senate. Whereas if perhaps at this stage he could have finally solved the solution himself. But no, I digress. I missed a bit there. Yes, sorry. The famous quote from Augustus, "Give me back my legions," and he was said to be banging his head against the wall in frustration. I wasn't used to defeat and humiliation to that extent. But as we said earlier, there's parallels with Wales. We've got guerrilla warfare, hide and seek tactics, and it was very difficult to control the island. But like some say, well, what about Ireland? I think I'm right in saying there's no tin, there's no lead, so the Romans thought, well, we'll concern ourselves with Ireland because they haven't got the raw materials we want. We all know that Wales was rich in gold and silver and lead and maccan. And this is not exactly fertile plains, is it? Highlands, mountainous country that is not necessarily worth fighting over. So, as a result of what I just said to you, loss of the legions and the escape of a lot of the tribesmen, Grappius, trying to build a frontier. Let's build a permanent frontier. There's lots of complex views on this. I mean, a wall will reduce the amount of soldiers needed than having a whole legion in a legionary base and scatter them with a wall instead, various little fortlets. We can occupy soldiers who are idle in times of peace by getting them to do some major building project, because the legions were known to be hands-on. Not the auxiliaries, but the legions. Rome was very clever at keeping the skills to themselves on that sort of thing. So here's our Hadrian's Wall. And what's interesting is, you can't see from the back of the spec, but I put it at the top there. Watchtowers as well, like we had at Gascoigne earlier. But all along this Cumberland coast, on the west coast, guarding that area from attack. And also, this red line here I'm following south of the wall, that's what we call Staingate. And that's what Agricola would have used. So, although there was no Hadrian Wall at the time of Agricola, he would have used Staingate. Similarly, Antonine Wall's got a military road running south of it as well, for obvious reasons. To get between each fort, move troops and supplies, etc. Hadrian's Wall, as a features, dimensions, is similar to the Antonine Wall, but there's some key differences. They've both got a ditch in front, so this is the north side, and on the south side they've both got military way, or Roman road. But on Hadrian's Wall they had a vallum and a military zone, so you've got civilians no-go area, military zone only, keep out, and you've got these vallum banks either side. Antonine Wall, meanwhile, hasn't got that huge vallum military zone behind, just the military road. We'll look at this later. But Hadrian's Wall wasn't invincible, it wasn't a total success then, during Hadrian's time.
just to say, I think that comes up later. I missed that. But there were a series of skirmishes that are documented on various times throughout that first century, second century rather. Not designed to be impregnable, it was a permeable wall. It was like a place for checks and for trade, and you were still allowed to go through, the gateways and access, but it was Pius's decision to abandon Hadrian's Wall, more or less, although it's still there, and build another wall further north, 100 miles north. Unlike Hadrian, non-military man really, Hadrian travelled the empire, Hadrian visited Britain, and he went up to Tyne and Newcastle to inspect what would be his wall. But I put AD 161 up here because we've got Hadrian's Wall in the 140s, and we've got 20 years later roughly, Antonine Wall. And there's a temple here in Rome, which is now a church, but it's dedicated to his wife, Faustina, because she died in 161. And I think there was a change in Antoninus at that time. I think his wife dying, he sort of focused more on military exploits. And this is a period where, I'm sure you know, emperors needed some success in war to increase their popularity and support. And we've even got that in the modern day. You think of the Falklands, but enough of that. So there's the empires we know at the time of Antoninus Pius. Pretty substantial. And as you know, there's a frontier of sorts in North Africa. Another one on the Danube, the Rhine, and of course Hadrian's Wall, and now the Antonine Wall. Now we know that Antoninus is starting to get interested in Britain because they found this inscribed stone in Corbridge, and Corbridge was a major supply depot where two legions were based south of Hadrian's Wall, but there's a stone there for rebuilding work going on, and it's dedicated to Antoninus Pius and the governor, Laureus Urbicus, who was Algerian, as it says there, and it's telling us that something's going on. They got plans. So there's this campaign to extend 100 miles north. Now this is to show you that, as with Hadrian's Wall, it wasn't all success, because you've got 140 to the wall being built, but then a decade later, there's trouble. How do we know this? This stone here, found in the river again, dredging like the Lioness and the Forth. This is in the Tyne though, and it says, Antoninus Pius had this built by two legions from Germania, and they've come along to help in the war effort. So they're drawing on soldiers from Germania because they need the extra numbers of soldiers for war. A little section now quickly on the Navy. Romans got about marching, as you know, roughly 20 miles a day, but with their excellent roads and cavalry and carts, but access by sea and river was vital. And we know this from Trajan's column, from Trajan's campaign in Dacia, off from Pannonia in Hungary. And these depict all these various things where they're on some kind of boat or ship. And as it says at the top, to go on a voyage, they're crossing the boats, supplies for tents, which employs some temporary camps, and so on. There's a coin here that depicts Hadrian's visit by ship to Tyne. This was found, as it says there, for the emperor. So, harbour, apologies if you can't see this at the back, but we got a map put into two sections. Basically, you've got Bowness and South Shields. Harbours on the east coast and the west coast. Same in Antonine. Harbours near Bishopston and harbours Carrigan, which you know all about. So here's a more detail of the west coast, with the wall actually starting at Old Kirkpatrick on the estuary there. So you can imagine ships coming right up to the wall, and similarly here, Carrigan, via Cramont, deep sea port there, which we saw at the beginning of the talk, and linking up with the wall here. And the same further north when we go to Carpow and the Tay. So here's Carrigan, again the field system for growing your own corn produce, supplies. Camelot further upriver, but still tidal. Some depictions of it. And then after Pius, we'll come back to him and his war, of course, later, but Septimius Severus, and we're talking the end of the 2nd century, early 3rd, so as it says there, so AD 208 was the actual campaigning. He restores Hadrian's Wall, hence some people thought it was a 7 war for years, but he doesn't touch the Antonine Wall, just a couple of forts. But he travels further north to the Tay and Carpow. Because he takes on, it's AD 197 to be exact, there was a major conflict again, and so successive emperors decided they had to do something about it. So Hadrian does, Pius does, and now Commodus and Severus and his two sons, Gracchus and Geta. Now, Carpow, again, upriver, there we are, and there's Orange Tucker, if you remember that from earlier with the Battle of Mons Grappius. Furthest north, incidentally, Strakatho, of a major fort, if you like. It's the furthest north we go, really, south of Aberdeen. There's an aerial picture showing the ditch, the outline of what's left of Carpow. Now, we know there was success. Several achieved success because they brought these coins, commemorative coins out to celebrate the fact, as we did with Hadrian, as they did with Pius. So, this is one at Carpow, but note the iconography. We've got a symbol of the Legion, 2nd Legion Augusta. We've got the winged horse. We've got the victory stood on the globe. And of course we've got the Emperor himself. So now we look at distant slabs. These are really elaborate carvings that were built or designed or carved by, on behalf of, each legion that actually physically built the wall, the Antonine Wall. Don't have these on Hadrian's Wall, but perhaps that's an indication the Antonine Wall was really in a war zone, and it was a sense of achievement. So what is a distant slab? It's basically demarcating a section of the wall that's been built by a specific legion. So, in this case, the 2nd Legion Augusta, with its symbol there, and of course recording the fact that it's Antoninus Pius, their governor. And again we've got the winged goddess, which is a theme that runs through this, which we'll look. 20 have been found of these. That's a heck of a lot for
37-mile wall. Where were they located? We assume on the wall, but some theories now are they're actually on the military way. I've got a modern motorway where you see them alongside as you go past. This map at the top, I'm not expecting you to be able to see this properly, but it just shows you the legions involved in the war from going to the 4th, showing 2nd, 6th, 2nd, 20th, 6th, 2nd, 20th, 6th, 2nd, 20th, and so on, in each section. Let's have a look at some more. Of course, you can picture the effort involved. You've got to prepare the landscape first before you can start cutting down trees. And notice on this Trajan's column again, they've got their shields and helmets at the ready, just in case they're ambushed while doing so. On the western end of the wall, Old Kirkpatrick, this is the distance now from there. Again, we've got the winged goddess Victorious, and she's got a fern or symbol of peace, and the globe, and the boar symbol of the 20th Legion, mainly based at Chester, and again the inscription, Adrian. This is really, they found traces of paint and some primary colours, but you know, they would have been similar to this in colour.
What's the wild boar doing at the bottom?
The boar.
What is the wild boar?
Yeah, the wild boar is symbol of the Legion,
Okay,
and in this case the 20th
thank you.
Legion. Thank you. This is the biggest distance snap found. And it's telling you a heck of a lot. So on the left, we've got the cavalryman riding over the barbarian. So it's all iconography here. It's got a meaning, and it's a statement. So we've been victorious. We've overcome the enemy, and it's quite gory because some enemy have been beheaded. Some are naked, and they're subservient to the cavalryman. And then on the other side is a legion doing a votive with a sacrificial goat there, and this is the 2nd Legion. There's been an interesting project going on when they were looking for world status, and which they got, and part of that was to involve students in masonry, and they came up with the idea of making these distance slabs, reproductions of them, and locating them on site. And this is one of the best of British nests, Acro nest, on site there. And so this is just rushing through some to show you which legions. So 2nd Legion distance slab, British nest. 2nd Legion Balmoody. What's this one? Construction of Antonine wall by order of Governor Urbicus. So we know that there's a Lollius Urbicus again that we heard mentioned at Corbridge. Rushing through. Yeah, it's just what I just said. So there's loads of these. As I said, there's several thousand inscriptions, and more being found all the time for what they call Roman inscriptions of Britain. Moody, Somerston, and again we've got the eagle, and we've got the goddess presenting the laurel, and we've got the cavalryman again running over the barbarian. We've got eagle here, which we saw at the beginning of that Eagle Rock. Again, symbol of the 2nd Legion there. Through 2nd Legion, Hutchinson Hill. Again, here's the eagle being presented from the goddess. What I didn't mention, it tells you exactly, they even tell you exactly how much of the wall was being built on each of these distance slabs. That's how much detail they go into. In this case, 3,000 feet. Right, so what about the wall itself? Again, Tracy's column shows the busy at work. This is quite a good slide to show you how it's constructed. You've got a stone base and then turf blocks. And then on top of the turf block would have been a wooden palisade. Dimensions, 3 metres high, the actual wall, and the stone foundation 14 feet wide. 3 metre high in total, so that includes the palisade. Angled, so wide at the bottom, narrow at the top. 6 feet high at the top, as it says there. And then the patrol wall is as much as 5 feet high with a wooden piece at the top. Here's a cross section again, showing the Roman road and the ditch in front. So, ditch in front, Roman road, and wooden palisade. Here's a cross section from 1959 of the turf blocks on top of the stone base. Beeston on the western side of the wall, again stone base of the wall. And then examples of the ditch. The ditch survives much better than obviously the wall because of intensive farming and urbanisation. Of course, we've got Glasgow and Edinburgh. Certainly Glasgow, a lot of that's on top of what would be the wall. So 40 feet wide ditch, massive ditch, 12 feet deep. Croy Hill, impressive, natural escarpment. And the road behind, there's a depiction of the road. So, and safe behind the wall. Leisure, bars. Even the military want bars. We know Killeen, of course, the legionary base, bars complex within the fort. And more remains of these because they're made of stone, not wood. Because you've got your hot room and furnaces. Some fines, gaming board, and strigil, a Venice strigil, which the rowers used to scrape in the skin after washing. And then I put this drain cover there because it's very similar to one they got in Killeen bars. Here's the gaming board again, and proof that we had the second legion, 20th legion rather there, on this brick stone. There's the baths at Bearston and the toilets, again because they got a Killeen. And there's more detail of the baths and the cold plunge pool, etc. So not just Bearston on the western edge of the wall, but roughly in the middle we've got Bar Hill again, which we looked at earlier with the well. Here's the baths. So you're on high ground with the fort behind you, and as it goes down, that's where your wall will be, the natural outside wall on the lower ground, at the top of the valley there. And then you've got your hypercaust for the hot room, the furnaces here, the hot hypercaust, there we are. Some more images of it. And then artist impression. So toilets at one end, and then you've got your, you all know the sequence of the hot room, cold room, tepidarium, frigidarium, caldarium, and then there's the furnace. Bar Hill, possibly, I think I'm right in saying, the highest, the most northerly bars in the empire. But perhaps in Tuttle had one as well, but that wasn't around long enough. So, auxiliaries next. again, not just the legions, so we've got the legions building the wall, then going back home to Killeen, back home to York, back home to Chester, Corbridge, to the safety of those areas, and leaving the hard work to the auxiliaries, not least of which with the Hamian Assyrian archers. And here we have countless examples of their presence here at Bar Hill, also served on Hadrian's Wall, Carvora. Both would stand here right in the middle of the wall, possibly the weakest point for enemy attack, which gives you an idea of perhaps how brave they were. So let's just whittle through these. Prefect of the Hamians. Perhaps an amusing thing, but I just happened to see this the other week. This is a Hamian Assyrian with a kind of aquila. So, a clever lot. Perhaps they indulged in underwater attack. I know that when the siege of Mona, or Anglesey, was an amphibious attack, wasn't it? On the sacred groves of the Druids. This is a depiction of a Syrian archer, and at Bar Hill we did find remnants of arrow and bow. So again, Hamian archers listed on the inscription. What I said earlier about the fort on Hadrian's Wall to the south, 100 miles south, had previously been occupied by Assyrians. What have we got here? Agrippa, first cohort of Hamians. Not surprisingly, they brought their goddess with them, their religious practice. So we're on the religious section now. The Syrian goddess, Clement's first cohort of Hamians set this up. Sylvanus, prefect, first cohort of Hamians. So religion's playing a key role here. Amusing one, this is Silenus, who stood at Bar Hill. Must have been a shrine near the fort, and you can see the infamous digitus, as it calls it, the extended middle finger, which is there, and similarly with the goddess Fortuna, who is also found at Killeen Amphitheatre. Deity of good fortune. Frustratingly, we just got the remnants of the feet there from the pedestal for a statue, but this one tells us the prefect cohort of Tungrians. So we know they're worshipping fortune as well. Statue of Hercules, just about working out a bearded figure, and again, with all these gods and goddesses, the Romans basically took the Greek gods and goddesses and made them their own, their equivalent. So this is Heracles, the son of Zeus. Moody, fort on the wall, of course, statue of Mars was found. A shrine to Venus at Croy Hill. Very interesting cult this. I've skipped Mithras, which is another story. It's a military cult, Mithras. But this is another military cult of Jupiter Dolichanes. And this is unique because it's not found that often in the Roman Empire. But here we are, two fragments of Jupiter Dolichanes found at Croy Hill. And the god is known to stand on top of, what does it say there? Standing on a bull, holding his double axe. The god Jupiter, mentioned here at Cremont. Jupiter, mentioned here at Kirkpatrick. And there was an idea every year they would worship Jupiter symbolically, and then the altar would be buried. Hence, there's a profusion of remains to be found because they deliberately buried them. They weren't destroyed. The goddess of the parade, Castle Hill. albeit just southeast of the wall, south of Edinburgh, Taprain North, a hill fort. A huge silver hoard was found that appeared to be deliberately buried. There's a silver plate. Deliberately buried by who? By the tribesmen who stolen it from the Romans. But this is Hercules again. And here we are, close up of that bridge nest, distant slab showing the sacrificial altar. So moving from religion to burials, and mausoleums and shrines, here we have the Thracian auxiliary with his tombstone at Mamres, the largest and oldest of the forts. Cremation, pot from Croy Hill, still the remnants of the cremation inside. Funeral monument, Bosanquet. The tombstone of a legionary soldier, and we think his two sons alongside from Croy Hill, showing their attributes of shields and spears and swords, helmets. And Victoria, which brings us nicely towards the end. So I think we haven't done bad time-wise. You'd probably say to me, well, was it a success? Because the Antonine War